Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime series proudly powered by leadershipbydesign.co, where we aim to add value to people's lives. You can and listen to us live every Wednesday and Thursday at the Lunchtime on ebizradio.com, where we talk everything leadership, coaching and marketing. And you can listen to us on the Lunchtime series on all major podcast channels today, guys. Joining me back on the show, we have our human talent-centered strategist, executive coach, agile people advocate, HR and leadership expert, Anja van Beek. Good morning, Anja. How are you doing?
Hello, Kevin. I'm doing well. It was such a lovely long weekend, ready for whatever the rest, I almost want to say the second half of the year is presenting us with. Yeah, but thank you for the invite. Lovely to be back.
Yes, no, we are smack bang in winter. So, and our winters, I mean, it's been there. We've had a few rainy days, but usually our winter days are really nice because you have that beautiful sunlight. And we, especially Joburg compared to Cape Town, we get the sun, they get the rain.
Yeah.
So I'm loving the sunshine, but not loving the cold evenings. The cold evenings can get quite cold.
Yeah.
So, Anya, today we chatted about a topic that I think a lot of people are not 100% clear on. So, I think it's going to be a nice way for us to maybe just to differentiate and understand what the difference is between mentoring and coaching.
Yeah.
And I think very often people do get them confused,
Mhm.
and I think just to raise the awareness around it. But also, I was in a coaching session with some senior sales people, and one of the conversations that came up was we were actually doing some role playing of like how you would coach and like how would you coach someone in this situation. And someone asked me the questions like, so are you actually saying we're moving out of management into a more of a coaching perspective? And I was like, yes, you are. We are. The world is. That's what the world is doing, right? Because management in itself is always instructive. It's very instructive. Do this, do this, do that. I'll tell you what the solution is, blah, 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 blah. And what we need people to be able to think for themselves. And I think from a coaching and mentoring perspective, that's what I think is really important about this conversation is we need to be able to empower people more now than ever before. What stands out for you about this conversation? Why did you want to have this conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. So, Kevin, thank you. You position it so nicely. And I think I just want to echo that when I work a lot like yourself with leaders, and I think one of the number one skills is for them to have that shift from, I'm not telling you what to do, I'm coaching you and asking questions, as you said, to empower and almost activate their thinking brain.
Yeah.
So, to the question, why is it important? I think we work in a world where people, especially our knowledge workers, need something different. We've appointed them for their talents, for their insights, their whatever experience, the industries they've worked in. And then when once they've onboarded, we want to tell them what to do. So what a waste of money. So how can we then structure the management style towards empowering them? And I think that is why it's important for leaders just to distinguish. There's a subtle difference between mentoring and coaching when you think from a management point of view. And yeah, just to get your head around when might it be applicable to coach and when might it be applicable to mentor, and what is the difference? And then perhaps also just to remind the listeners that there is a time where it's necessary to say, we're doing this, yeah, to be instructive and to tell them what to do. Especially if there's a crisis or there's something, a quick decision that we need to make, then we might not have the luxury of coaching in that moment, but always to think of what's my default, not instructing any longer, but rather default to a coaching management style. So I think I think that's why it's critical for people just to get now I get what you mean by coaching, and I see what is mentoring and how that can be different when I empower people.
I think also, as it strikes me, as you speak now, I think one of the forefront things or attributes I would showcase from a mentoring perspective would be a mentor doesn't need to. I mean, one of the things that I came across that speaks about this is you don't necessarily need to be a qualified mentor. You can't be called qualified, but you don't get qualified to be a mentor. Mentorship is an example set. It's a way of being. It's a way of showing up. It's a way of presenting yourself in a way that people admire and look up and go, wow, I want to learn. I want to observe. I want to emulate what this person, So there's a mentoring very often shows up as an example to its environment.
Yeah.
Where coaching is you get qualified, you get techniques, you get tools, you're going to sit down, you ask probing questions, and you help people think to get to where they're going. But with that said, your mentoring and your coaching very often can be in the same person, and used at very different times.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to build on what you've mentioned is I once read a definition where they talk about mentors as reflection enablers. So it's really sharing, as you said, someone that has experience and knowledge, that has a story to tell. It doesn't mean that you need to be, older or further down in your life path, but it's usually someone that has knowledge and experience that someone else can benefit from. Now, if I reflect on my leadership journey, there has been 3 very distinct places where a mentor supported me. And another thing that I just want to highlight when we think of mentoring is often people think of, if I'm in HR, my mentor needs to be an HR specialist. And that's definitely not the case. So again, you can play or be a mentor for someone of a totally different organization in a totally different setting. But it's really, how do you use my experience and learnings to have better insight and make better decisions and choices for where you are in life? And I think for me, that's the first distinction when we talk about coaching and mentoring, because coaching mainly focus on, as you said, asking questions. I have a very, very clear goal. So even if the coaching session is 15 minutes long, doesn't need to be an hour, but there's usually a very clear goal that is defined. Where with mentoring, I might be just telling you a story. You might come to me and share about the client that, you have a challenge with a client situation and the meeting, and they were so upset and you're not sure how to handle that. And I can say, what has happened to me, sharing my story. But I think even when you share your story and share your insight, what you have learned, it's always to ask that team member, so what would you do? What would you choose? So I think what I like about both coaching and mentoring is giving the ball back to that individual to say, okay, so what would you now do based on what I shared? Where with coaching, I don't necessarily share my stories. That's not my role. It's more to ask them the question, to explore and to say, okay, but let me reflect on this in a different way, or let me activate that neocortex, that thriving brain, and see how I can resolve this issue.
What I find interesting is coaching is not advice.
No, not at all.
You'll find people, and through the role playing that I've done now recently with some clients, you kind of go, okay, guys, this is the person's problem. Yes. Do some coaching, and immediately people fall into, well, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, and they immediately just give advice. Yeah. Where that is absolutely not coaching whatsoever. Yeah. Coaching, and the reason for this, guys, for those who are listening, coaching specifically, when you become a practitioner, one of the very first things you learn about coaching is it is an absolute essential that you come from a neutral position. So the moment you give advice, you're giving advice through your own filters, your own decision-making processes. your own clarification processes. It's all coming from how you would make a decision based on the facts displayed in front of you.
Yeah.
The point is, you do not know the map and territory of the human you're dealing with. So if you're not eliciting the questions, that's why it's not advice giving. It's an absolute probing for questions to see what is this person bringing to this moment and understanding from this moment so that they understand how to do what they need to do about it. That's what
Absolutely.
coaching is so important.
Yeah, and again, just to build on what you mentioned, Kevin, is I think that's why whenever I support leaders to adopt this coaching management style, one of the big insights or lessons or skills, let's call it a skill. One of the skills that I try to show them is to use the magic of open questions, because the magic of open questions is say, but what is the real issue for you? So immediately what happens? I'm activating the brain. Oh, now they think. What's the next question? So what I'm trying to say here is, again, to your point of not giving advice. So some of the leaders are now smart. They now know where they want to go. And I'm now just putting it in the form of a question, which again, it might be leading them down a path. And I think that is when what people usually find very interesting to say, okay, try to coach your teammate and focus on the individual, not the problem. Because if you focus on the problem, that's when you want to give advice and say, do this, do that, have you tried this? Versus if you focus on that individual and supporting them to say, okay, so what is it that you want to achieve here? Or what's the real issue? And what are your options? What's the reality for you at the moment? Again, all questions that make them think for themselves. And that's a beautiful process. I was working with a group of leaders recently, and two of them at the beginning of the training said, a coaching management style will just not work in our environment. We're fast-paced, no time for coaching. And yeah, I laughed.
Yeah.
And at the end I said, okay, so where's your thoughts now? And they all said, it's amazing to see what happens when you create that space just for someone else to think out loud. And it can be, as I said, short and sweet. But yeah, that's for me the magic of open questions.
But as you mention it now, Anja, and I think that's what people don't realize is when you position a thought-provoking, and the quality of your question as well is so important, because when you do that, you enable someone to discover their own personal power.
Yeah.
They discover a blind spot. They discover their own processing. They'll have a moment of going, well, what about this and what about this? But they'll also might have a moment about like, I absolutely don't know what to do. And, I usually, when someone just absolutely doesn't, I ask them, but what if you did know?
Yeah.
Like if you could guess, like if you had a magic wand and you had the solution, what could it be?
Yeah.
And suddenly when you just get people to reach a little bit into their own ability and into their own personal power, they suddenly realize, oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't even think of it that way.
Yeah, and you know what actually can work well as well, because we problem solvers. I mean, I think that in South Africa specifically, we're so good with solving problems. Is even asking them the question, if this was your friend in the situation, what would you do, or what would you recommend? And again, as you said, it's just getting that thought process moving along. But you know what I have seen, and Kevin, I don't know if you can relate, but I can definitely relate with this, is that when you now a manager and you're confident, you want to seem confident and to know what you're doing. And sometimes, especially when they adjust the coaching style, for the first time, they often ask a question. Now, when I ask a question, as you said, it's thought-provoking. So now the person is sitting there, and instead of just being comfortable with the silence and allowing them a few, minutes or seconds for their thoughts, you immediately jump in either with another question or with, starting to give advice because you're uncomfortable with the silence. And I think that's another habit for managers, that when they want to adopt this coaching style, just to start to get comfortable with a little bit of silence, give that other person the space to think, before you just fill the silences because you're uncomfortable.
Exactly. And I want to add to that is mind your ego,
Yeah.
because I know what the answers could be, because I know I've done it for 20 years, because of all these reasons we come up with. My ego gets in the way of giving this opportunity to this person to think for themselves. Because you have to come to me for the answer because I've got all the answers. I don't have all the answers. As a coach, you shouldn't have all the answers. What you should have is a whole bunch of really good questions that really elicit information out of people, right? And when your ego gets in the way, you tend to want to uh, and I think it's your ego. I think it's your ego or the lack of self-esteem that you might be trying to issue on someone and go, well, I do have the information, so look at me. I can answer all your questions. That's not useful in either aspect, right? So mind your ego, but also allow for that silence. Don't rush to the answer, because you're not helping by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think then if we then can just shift quickly to mentoring, and I just want to explain the difference in a practical way. So what I have seen is, I mean, as a manager, we have different hats. When is it coaching? When is it mentoring? And often organizations does not have a formal mentoring program in place. And then you just naturally a mentor become, or someone comes to you and say, as you said, I would love to learn from you. I would love to gain some insight into your journey. Please share with me. But I think mentoring is when you share your lessons. When you said, way back when this has happened, or when I had to make this decision, this is the following that I've considered. And I mean, again, back to my story, there was 3 distinct areas when I used the mentor, or really appreciated the mentor. The first one was I was in business and I wanted to move over into HR because there wasn't a strong HR component in the business. And I mean, to move away from a business unit into a supporting business unit was for me, am I making the right decision? So that was a huge decision for me. The other one was when I was appointed in my last corporate role, and I suddenly now responsible for quite a big region. It was the first time that I've managed people from different cultures and different countries. And again, it was invaluable for me to gain the insight from someone that has been there, that has bumped their heads, and to see, okay, now that I'm aware of this, what would I do differently? But yeah, as I said, again, even if you're mentoring, you still ask them, so what would you do? Or what do you choose? Or now that you know my story or my lesson, what would you do differently in the scenario that you're facing?
So I've got some interesting information to share, and I think what I want to do now is, and you can just add to this, is what skills are required for mentoring and what skills are required for coaching. So some of the things that, and I got this from pushfar.com. It's an article that's written on their website, and it's just a useful kind of reference point because I think it's the information they give is quite valuable. From a mentoring skills perspective, is having a keen interest in helping others. I mean, that's a no-brainer. They also have like you were saying now, first-hand experience, knowledge, and insights in an area providing mentoring about something specific. So an area that's like, this is how you move from there to there. This is how you would do that. So having that first-hand experience. But it's also about relationship building and interpersonal skills, which are a crucial thing for mentoring. And that is almost like a no-brainer because, when you don't have that ability, then it can be quite, you can struggle to not have, because essentially as a mentor, if you're not having a great relationship with your mentee, he might disrespect you. He might think that you're full of yourself, or he might, so they're having that close bond and rapport. The last thing that they mention here is it's motivating, it's encouraging, and it's inspiring energy throughout all mentoring meetings. Right. And which I also thought was really quite significant, because a coach doesn't necessarily have to inspire you. A coach doesn't have to get you all energized, and a coach is really there to give you a different version, a different frame, a different thought process, and really put you and really empower yourself. Right. Where a mentor could be inspiring. Right. And I think that's a really important part of. Is there any more skills that you think we could add to a mentoring side?
So no, I think the one thing that I have seen is it takes time. So yes, you're definitely interested in serving other people, but especially when you're in a formal mentoring relationship, it takes time and it's a
Yeah.
commitment. So you do need to make sure that you're up for this, because it doesn't help that now I have time in my diary. Yes, mentee, come, let's have a chat. And then next month there's no time in my diary. So it is quite time consuming. So it's not a skill, but just something that people need to be aware of. But I absolutely agree with that trust, that bond, because it might be, depending on who's your mentee, that they will really, it's not about the function only, the functional expertise. It's really about life expertise as well. And I think that is why, if you don't have that trust, it might be artificial, it might be on here, and you're not as powerful as it can be.
Absolutely. So some of the skills required from a coaching perspective, they mention a relationship of equals where the coach and the coachee have mutual understanding and respect, which is critical. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer, where in a mentor-mentee situation, you'll often find the mentee is, aspiring to be like, or really looks up to their mentor, where a coach and a coachee, it's equal footing. Like, no, we're not better than each other in any way. And it's really about having that mutual respect for each other's time, for the commitment that you're making, for the goals that you're setting. And if that's not in place, then, you're changing the roles of coach and coachee, I think.
Yeah.
The ability to maximize resources, inspire in a similar way to inquire, sure, if I can get my English in the right way, yeah. In a similar way to that required of mentoring, yes. So maximize resources and inspire. To recognize strengths and challenge the individuals being coached in order to propel them forward. And I think that's a very key, where mentorship is about guidance, and you send them away and they come back and so what have you done? How's it worked for you? What are you struggling with? Where a coach really wants you to propel forward. One of the things I always say, if there's no action involved, you're not coaching. Then you're managing, or you're doing something else. So like, there has to be action involved. So you might be learning a skill, you might be understanding and probing for information, but there has to be a certain amount of action that you're accountable towards taking action forward, because it's that's the point of having a coach, is to be better than I was last week. I mean, the other one, it says the ability to raise awarenesses and responsibility, both within the individual and the environment where the individual is. And the last one it says is real meaning, finding the right balance of interpersonal skills and practical skills to convert discussions into actions, like we just mentioned. But I think that's a really good sort of differentiator of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Kevin, perhaps two things just want to mention on this. So what I have experienced is the reverse mentoring. So as you said, usually the mentor more experienced and I'm giving some insights or sharing stories. And then when it comes, usually in my case, to technology, it's reverse mentoring, where they say, have you tried this? Do this. If you want to post this, do that. So I actually have a friend that we have that reverse mentoring relationship. But the other point that I want to make is that when you coach someone, yes, absolutely, it's about stretching them outside of their comfort zone, because that's where we grow. But also making it a safe enough space for them to be comfortable to grow. But I mean, in a way, that can be true with mentoring as well. But I think more so in coaching, that I need the safe space because I'm stretching you. Yeah. And I think when you mentioned about, as a mentor, I need to motivate and inspire. With the coaching, for me, it's then also connecting them to their best selves, so that the motivation is coming intrinsically. So again, perhaps where the focus lies, but both are powerful, empowering tools or techniques that we can, or styles that we can use then.
The last point that I think is relevant to mention, and please add to this, the key benefits of mentoring and coaching. Both mentoring and coaching are extremely effective learning techniques, right? So the one where you could be learning by example, and that's, from an NLP perspective, very often it's the observation of excellence of behavior and how you can take that structure and strategy, implement that into your own life, and have same or similar results. So from that, it can be an observed excellence that you're implementing, and that in itself is very important. Both mentoring and coaching can be formal and informal, and I think that's also what people don't often realize. They very often a really good mentor will be able to mentor unofficially and informally without even people realizing it. And I think when you realize that this person's actually in that mode, they do it. It's subtle. It's obvious. It becomes the example people want to follow, and that to me is a true sign of a really good mentor.
Yeah, and they're usually very good storytelling. So they have a compelling story, and you want to listen and see, okay, so what can I take away from here? Yeah, absolutely.
Both can also, it also says here, the benefits of this, both can also increase employee engagement and retention when applied, which I think a lot of people don't realize is they often step into that management approach immediately. And, if you think of retention as it is in the world today, people don't need a very big reason to resign. They do it quite easily, and flip between jobs and roles and things quite easily. So by having this culture of mentoring and coaching within your environment can really up the engagement of your employee rate, but also the retention rate of why you want to be in this company. And I don't think a lot of companies realize that.
Yeah, and I think that is why whenever I think of that human connection that you mentioned when you introduced me, this is such a practical example of, if I'm focused on you as an individual, I would empower you to learn by either coaching or mentoring. Yeah, so beautifully said. Sure.
And the last one, which I think is worth mentioning, is both dramatically improve individual performance. And I think that's the point. At the end of the day, you want to be able to, whether you're mentoring and you're inspiring, and people go, yeah, I want that for my life, that will kick people into performance. That's where high performance teams really have a lot of this type of behavior and culture happening in their environment, right? Where you could potentially compare this to a low performing environment, where you'll find less of this is happening, because people do feel uninspired and unmoved to really, want to be better at their lives. So I think, companies what people should take away about from today's conversation is I think in the 80s, the books that were written was, this is what a director looks like. This is management and management styles. And, like we have those textbooks of what business used to be, but we're not living in the world where business used to be like that, or is like that anymore. We're living in the future. We're living where things like soft skills, like empathy, the simple nature of being curious is at the forefront of what leadership looks like. So we really have to understand the importance of mentoring and coaching, and understand, yes, management is there and it's necessary. It's a part of a business structure. But very often when you're dealing with people, mentoring and coaching really uplifts performance and engagement within that environment. So when you just do that framing, and you've got that cognizance of, how am I showing up as management in this environment, or leadership in this environment, and how is it really impacting the individuals that I'm relying on?
Yeah. So perhaps just to end with what I would like to leave with the listeners, I call them the 3 C's, and this can be applicable in coaching or in mentoring. But if you think of the compassion, and you've alluded to that so nicely, you're really compassionate and you care for the individual, being it their growth, being it their career, being it their goal, you need that part. I think then that you mentioned the curiosity, yeah. So being curious. So why did they react like this? And again, especially if you're someone that falls into the trap of giving advice, the curiosity is the one that can support you to say, let me remain curious and understand rather than giving advice. But the third one is also to have the courage to do this, because it is a lot easier, to give them, exactly what to do, give them the answer. So to have the courage not to do that, and to have the courage to take perhaps a few more minutes and support their growth. But also, I think the courage, because this can be true, and I'm now talking from a manager being a coach and a manager being a mentor, there is a place where you do need to give feedback. If it's only, the questions and only the stories, we definitely need that. But when I reflect on the situation, these are what I have observed, and this is what I'm beginning to wonder. How do you see it? But I think to have the courage to give the hard-hitting feedback when needed, because that is also part of the growth and the blind spots they might have.
Absolutely. Anja, thank you. I think that's such a beautiful, I love the 3 C's. I'm so going to totally share that with everybody, guys. Compassion, curiosity, and
courage.
Courage, yes. Compassion, curiosity, and courage. I think that's such a wonderful way to approach that, and it's a really easy one to remember, right? Yeah. Guys, if you want to get hold of Anja, please go and check out her, Anja van Beek, on LinkedIn. All her information is usually down in the description boxes. She's a human talent-centered strategist, executive coach, agile people advocate, and HR and leadership expert. Anja van Beek, thank you so much for today, and I'll chat to you soon.
Thank you, Kevin. Have a lovely week. Goodbye.
Just for now.